Okay, so welcome everyone. Feel free to introduce yourself in the chat. I can see that. Yes, happy hump day. So great to see familiar names here. Wonderful. Okay, so I am turning this off here, the beautiful music, and welcome you all again officially. Actually, I'm gonna get us into all one screen so you all can see the Brady Bunch, if that's how you're set up. Of course, if you're on a device, on a handheld device or something similar, then you likely have to scroll between the screens. But welcome so much to this series. I'm so excited to be here with you all. I just want to point out that this session will be recorded. And if you would like to have your closed captioning on, which captures what whoever is speaking is saying, so you can read along, you can turn that on in your own settings. And if you do not wish to see that, you can also turn that off. So I just wanted to make that clear from the beginning. And I shall get us started. So as we are beginning, I'm sorry if I'm going to stalk a little. I'm not always the best person multitasking, but I am still admitting people. And I don't want to miss anyone who is joining us today. So I would like to just begin with a brief welcome and thank you really to my colleagues who are helping us to pull this off, this new summer series. We have been holding this Growing Resilience series for I think almost 2 years now that we've held these various webinar series on topics related to resilience. And so this is the second, actually, yes, it's the second official summer where we are hosting a resilience series. And this is in collaboration with Cornell Cooperative Extension in Delaware County and in Orange County. So big shout out to my colleagues in Delaware. I'm in Orange, and I'll introduce myself with a little bit more detail in just a moment. But we're thrilled to be able to collaborate across the state on topics that we are all interested in and that we really, engage to share different stories. There are recordings of these webinars available, and if you would like them, I will find a minute to either put it in the chat, ask perhaps one of my colleagues if they can put it in the chat. If I don't do it now, because it will definitely take my mind off you all, then I will include the links to the recordings in the email to follow up with you all. But as you know, this is a series, so I am going to go back to sharing my screen in just a second. Where are we at? Okay. So I'm sorry, I just need to orient myself for one moment to make sure that I'm not leaving anyone hanging in the waiting room. So this series will talk about understanding wellness and really providing us with a different framework, I hope, in some ways, or actually, sorry, not wellness, we're talking about well-being. And of course, these two are very much related, but it's really about well-being. And so the framework that we're hoping to establish here in this program is based on many of the webinars that we've already held. Some of it may be repeated in some ways. I hope that just adds to your own, expansion of language and understanding of the same topic. I don't know about you all, but I certainly love to hear how other people or how various people present on certain topics, just because it gives me an opportunity to expand my own understanding and perspectives. It's just a continued growth process, so to speak. All right, so let us jump in. I want to encourage you all to say hello in the chat. If you can, and I see so many of you are actually already doing this, which is fantastic. So yeah, please continue to do that and share with each other. And I will tell, as I tell you, I'm Julika von Stackelberg. I am the Family and Community Resilience Educator at Cornell Cooperative Extension in Orange County. And I'm going to just share with you a little bit more about where I'm coming from so you have a better idea in a minute. So before we go there, I want to point out that this is the first of our 6-week series. Next week, we will talk about introducing protective factors. And then on the 20th, we will have an asynchronous activity that you will be receiving in your email when you signed up for the series. I will, everyone will receive that email, including the recordings and all that. But so this will be something that you can do on your own time, but we really want to integrate what you're doing into the next session. So on the 27th, we'll be talking about healing-centered engagement, but we will also incorporate some of what you might have worked on in the week prior. And then we'll talk about creating trauma-informed and healing-centered environments and what that looks like. And then at the end, we want to make sure that we also address the topic of compassion resilience. You might have heard the term compassion fatigue, so it's important that we keep resilient in that area too. And what that means, what resilience in this context means, is something that we're going to hopefully establish today. Okay, so back to my own story a little bit. I would also like to invite you here to put in the chat what nurtures or who nurtured you. And when I talk about that, I really would love to hear like what were potential experiences or individuals or people, groups that might have supported you in your own growing understanding of maybe yourself and the world and how we act with each other or interact with each other. And so just to give you a quick background to me, so you kind of have a picture of where my understanding and my knowledge grew and what were the nurturing factors to that. So I grew up in Germany, as you can probably tell by my accent. I still have it, even though my children tell me they don't really hear it, but I know I have it. And I grew up there feeling pretty much the weight of the history in Germany, and I somehow couldn't wait to get out. And so, as I left after high school to go to South Africa and eventually moved to England and then came to the United States, I thought I could run away from that history. And I thought that, well, here I am not really part of whatever the history was that may have contributed to some of the trauma that people experience as a result of that. And then I ended up becoming a parent, and I was also the kind of person who I've moved countries and I've done things on my own, so I've got this, and I don't need a lot of help, and I can take care of my children by myself, and I have always wanted to be a mother, so that should all come easy. And of course, I realized that that wasn't the case. Things don't just come so easy. And not just because, as I can say now, that I am a failure or something. I knew, at the time, of course, you feel inadequate. But it's these kinds of moments of maybe even sometimes desperation that led me to search and dig for parenting support, and then also really trying to understand my own history and how things are related. And long story short, I uncovered that, first of all, I can't run away from this, part of world history in Germany, because we are all so intricately connected and our stories are intertwined, that I can't just, get up and go. And in order to really be the kind of parent I want to be, I need to open up and search and apart from the fact that I found a lot of wonderful parenting programs and books and so forth that led me to becoming a parenting educator, I also learned that, that it's not just a do-it-yourself thing. And the same thing really applies to resilience. So my education is in Germany, South Africa, as well as in England, and I am in the process of working towards my PhD here in the United States. And so I have obviously some education, academic, influences in how I present or what informs my knowledge. But I also have, life experience and personal connections through the people I met in these different places, including here. And so all of these things really, and these experiences as a human in this quite messy world, have informed what we're talking about today. So what we teach at Cornell Cooperative Extension is usually research-based, and this is as well, but there is other parts to it too. And I want to just say that because you all bring those parts as well. Where your information comes from, sometimes we don't give enough credit to, our neighborhoods, our grandmothers or grandfathers or other kinship, other kin, so to speak, friends who have influenced and helped us shape our knowledge. So thank you so much, everyone, for putting your own stories here. I am going to read those as I go along. I really appreciate it. And yes, so this is, so pay attention to what nurtures you, because this is what shapes us. And as we're building these frameworks for well-being, these are very important to keep in mind. So today we talk about the body-mind connection and how N.E.A.R science, and I will go through the acronym with you all together, can help us to understand or really build these frameworks for well-being that we talked about. So N.E.A.R science stands for Neurobiology, Epigenetics, ACEs, and Resilience. And I should really add to this that Terry Barilla, who is the co-founder of the Community Resilience Initiative in Walla Walla County in Washington State, who gave a presentation here earlier this year, as well as her colleague, Rich Griffin. They both are huge contributors to this movement of understanding resilience from different perspectives. And so they talked about this, they came up with this acronym. So I just want to really give them credit and thanks, and want to invite you to please go back and watch their recordings. They're really wonderful. So let's start talking about neurobiology, brain science. This is really what continues to be explained through science and different experiments and how we put things together, especially over the last 20 years. So much new knowledge has come up as a result of us being able to understand brain science. And I'm sure that many of you here already have some kind of a baseline understanding, if not even a pretty intricate understanding of how that works. And so if that's the case, I invite you to contribute in the chat. And I also welcome you to, yes, have any other ideas. And if you have questions, please put them there as well. If I don't notice the question, unmute yourself and, speak it out loud. So I'm going to talk about the brain for a moment. And here, so we have, if we take the brain into 3 parts, we can divide it, very simple for us who are not the neurobiologists, into the survival part of the brain, the limbic part of the brain, and the cortex. And so each one of these areas has different functions. If you think about the brain as sort of the upstairs brain and the downstairs brain, then the cortex is where, critical thinking, decision-making, body control, empathy, and also, and so on, is generated, so to speak. That is in the upstairs brain. And in the downstairs brain, you have more of the functions that keep us alive, like breathing, strong emotions, not impulsions, maybe that's a new word, fight or flight. So these are, this is how the brain can be divided. And one thing I would add is that the brain develops from the inside out and from the bottom up. So when we're born, the only part that is fully functioning in the brain is really the survival part of the brain, and the other parts continue to develop, incredibly quickly, but the brain is not fully developed until the mid to late 20s, really, sometimes early 30s. So, and you can think about this too, that, this is an important part. Each one of these parts is really critical. And the fact that, we have a downstairs and an upstairs in some homes, right? You can think about it like downstairs is where all the sustenance things happening, like the kitchen is usually downstairs if you have a, multi-story house. All the utility rooms are usually downstairs or perhaps even in the basement. So those are the things that keep us going. And then in the upstairs is where, we do the thinking work, maybe if there's a study or, a place where we do homework or whatnot. So those are that's a way of how you can look at that, and how our brain continues to develop and shape itself is what really matters. And I'll talk about this and how this is connected. So you all know that when you experience something like, a strong emotion, let's say fear. I mean, let's just take the example of you going, in the woods for a walk and all of a sudden you see a bear. So a really strong emotion that may come up is, fear. And so what happens when you are afraid is your heart starts to beat faster, your breath goes a little faster, and you basically have a reaction where, if I go back to this for a second, the upstairs brain is recognizing something and says, oops, let's go here to survival mode. So everybody's going downstairs, and downstairs, we're accelerating all of the responses that ultimately help us to survive. So this is what we then call the, fight, flight, or freeze mechanism. And so in that mechanism, we are able to then, react or respond way faster. We're not here negotiating, was I supposed to sing happy birthday or clap really loud? Should I walk or run? You don't want to get into a philosophical or, theoretical conversation with yourself in the higher part of your brain about what to do. You really are here to survive. And so this is how kind of these two parts talk to each other. So, and what you can see here through the parasympathetic and the sympathetic responses is that, so there is these two response systems basically function in a way that one is called sort of the rest and digest, and the other one is the stress response that gets activated, right? So when your higher brain, when everybody is active upstairs in the brain, right, and things are smooth, then you are in your parasympathetic state, basically. So and that is, and the way you can identify this in your body, and I really want you to, take notice of this in a moment. So, the way your pupils are, the size of your pupils, how your heart rate is, are your airways open? Are you breathing easily? You have your liver functioning going. You may not be aware of it, but, hopefully that's the case. And so all these other systems are basically impacted by what state we're in. So if your state becomes heightened, in other words, if your survival, mechanisms are being triggered and the downstairs part of your brain knows, oh, we have to do something here, then the pupils dilate so that we can better see or see more and take more in. Our heart rate increases because it pumps away blood from the higher parts of the brain into the lower parts, so that the lower parts can then supply our ligaments with blood so we can be faster, right? And so that impacts all of these, aspects in our bodies that you can see, right? So the airways, our sweat glands, you might feel a little bit sweaty, you get sweaty hands. Sometimes even with the liver or our digestive system. People who are in shock sometimes also have to go and release themselves. How the adrenal glands are stimulated, our uterus and the urinary system. So all of these parts get stimulated in order to help us to survive. And so these are very important and natural mechanisms that take place, in our everyday life in order to help us survive. And how they interfere with our resilience is what we'll talk about in a little bit, but just to kind of give you that idea of what that looks like. So what happens, though, is when we experience a lot of stimulation of what we can see here in this slide before, right? The sympathetic response is that we end up basically with a flooded or higher releases of cortisol, higher releases of adrenaline that then have to go through the body and have to somehow be released. And so what happens when we experience stress, constant stress, and we'll talk about that more too, is that basically we end up having an overworked system. And so this is what is referred to as the allostatic load. So here, as you can see, it says the wear and tear in the body that accumulates as an individual is exposed to repeated or chronic stress. So if you are constantly stimulated in your survival part, then you can imagine there's a lot of garbage that needs to be taken out all the time, right? All of these chemicals that need to be flushed and all that. And so at some point when that just doesn't stop, we might experience fatigue. We might experience an inability to really literally digest certain things. So because our system responds to our environment, and I'm very sure this is nothing new to you. I hope that when we talk about it in these terms, we are able to put together puzzle pieces, basically, of how we are able to understand ourselves. In other words, we can develop deeper and richer pictures of how these mechanisms connect to one another. So, as we experience doses of toxic stress and acute trauma, we're basically adding to the load that we're all already carrying. And without intervention and support over time, this stress burden takes a toll on our physical and mental health and well-being. And so when we talk about frameworks for well-being, we need to take that into consideration. We need to take into consideration how our neurobiology works. And if I can just kind of appeal to us in a way to understand that, as much as we think, you can just shake certain things off, the body remembers, the body is experiencing, whether we want it or not, we have a physiological and neurobiological response to the experiences that we have. And so what makes it a little bit more complicated, and this is when we get into the epigenetics part, is the fact that it's not just what we experience, it's also how we perceive the experience. So, some of us might go into the woods and have a complete panic attack when they see a snake. That could have been me. I definitely had a snake phobia, and I'm very sad still that no one recorded me when I ran away from a black mamba in South Africa once, because I swear I broke a world record, but no one was there. So here it was a super heightened response, whereas the people who were with me, they had a much lower response. So in other words, I perceived the situation, the same situation, a whole lot more dangerous, and had a whole, more intense response than did, the people I was with. So this is really, this is important. So to understand is that not just what we're experiencing, but also how we perceive the experiences we have. And so that is, again, what can contribute to that, allostatic load. Okay, and so here's what you can see happens in the brain. On the left side, you see it's called a healthy brain. I would just say that that's maybe not the best terminology. I couldn't change that label as it's a picture I took from somewhere else, because, you know, healthy means a lot of different things, but this is a brain that is fully online. Okay, so this brain, you can see the front part is fully active, it's flooded with blood, and that's where you know, the brain is active. So that's the upstairs brain in action. On the right-hand side, you see a downstairs brain in action. See at the bottom, where I don't know if you can see my blue little cursor, thank you. That is, you know, there's a lot more activity here, and in the lower, in these middle parts of the brain, there is much less activity. So this is what you would call someone who is experiencing toxic stress. So you can see it that intensely, right? So it's not something we can actually control. You know, yes, sorry, let me correct myself. We can influence that through, you know, practices that we'll explore a little bit too, and I hope you can add to that. But basically, so we can do things to regulate, but the way we respond, or if our brain is developed in a way that we're not very conscious of, then, you know, we may have reactions that just come because of, you know, how brain is structured in that sense. Okay, so here, let's actually do a quick check in. I would love to hear from you. How do you know that you're experiencing stress? And you can put that in the chat too. And how do you know that others around you are experiencing stress? So I'm gonna, as you are typing in, I am going to just read a couple of those things you wrote before. Yeah, someone says you feel it in your breathing. Cat for me, clenching my jaw, grinding my teeth, changing in the body language disposition. For a brows, oh yes, clenched jars. No, not jars, jaws. Jaws, sorry. Here comes my accent. We have probably stuck jars too, but yes. Coloring in the face even changes, so right. Sweat, racing heart, get easily angry if you is not short. Yeah, emotional, upset, crying, screaming, isolating, upset. Yeah, and so I bet that's also what you notice in others and yourself in your chest. Yes. So wonderful. Yeah, so lack of sleep, muscle tension. I see your comments. And so, yeah, so we all know what that means, right? And so I don't know about you, but I have definitely put myself down because I have had some of these experiences. And what I did as a result is I would just ignore it. You know, I feel so tense. So instead of saying, oh, I feel tense, I wonder what's happening. You know, you might feel like, you know, I just have to push through. Or, you know, you feel tired, you push through. You, you know, you don't sleep well and you continue to, you know, push through. So that is I think also has probably to do with, you know, culture, in a way that we live in this culture that is expecting us to be productive. And that can be very extractive, really, for so many of us. And so we do the same thing to ourselves. We're trying to extract productivity and you know, function, basically, and we're not recognizing that what is happening in us is nothing against us. It's basically our bodies talking to us, having a conversation, saying, hello, you know, this is what's going on. There's something that's stressing me out, and therefore I have to do some overtime here on your shoulders. So really learning to understand that and to read our bodies is a huge cue to really becoming aware or supporting our own wellness. So yeah, thank you. Keep it going. I'm gonna, in the chat, I'm gonna take us to this next part, which is talking about epigenetics. So as I mentioned, epigenetics, and actually I'm going to start us off with a quick film. Let's make sure this works. Yes. So this film will give you just a little bit of an insight into epigenetics, and then I will add on to that.
The sweet smell of fruit doesn't normally send rats running, but when researchers paired the orange, cherry, almondy scent of the chemical acetophenone with a painful electric shock, lab rats quickly learned to fear it. Along the way, extra neurons sprouted in their noses and in the smell processing center of their brains, making them super sensitive to the scent. This result isn't shocking. What is surprising is that the rats' pups and their pups' pups were also startled by the smell of acetophenone and had the same extra neurons as their fathers, despite never having been introduced to either their dads or the fruity scent before. But how could the pups have inherited something that their fathers learned? Basic genetics tells us that only DNA gets passed along to offspring. Characteristics like memories, scars, or giant muscles can't get passed on since acquiring them doesn't alter the genetic code. But it turns out that instilling fear in the rats did trigger genetic changes, not in the DNA sequence itself, but instead in how that code was read and used in the rats' bodies. In every cell, biological machinery constantly translates DNA into the proteins needed to carry out vital processes. Chemical switches attached to the DNA turn genes on or off or up and down, telling the machinery which proteins to produce and in what quantities. These switches, called epigenetic tags, are why a kidney cell looks and acts differently than a skin or nerve cell, even though all three cells have identical DNA. But the switches in any one cell aren't set in stone. Teaching those rats to fear the fruity smell switched one of their smell-sensing genes into overdrive. Researchers don't know all the places in the rats' bodies where this switch got flipped, but they know it happened in one key set of cells, the rats' sperm cells, which would one day pass along the tweaked genetic material, making the next generation of rats super sensitive to acetophenone. Rodents aren't the only creatures demonstrating this weird type of inheritance. In Epigenetics, Sweden, boys who suffered through tough winter famines went on to have super healthy sons, with extremely low rates of heart disease and diabetes. And their sons had the same excellent health, living an unbelievable 32 years longer on average than the grandsons of boys who hadn't gone hungry. To be clear, this does not mean that we should start starving our kids for the benefit of future generations. Scientists don't even know yet exactly which switches the Swedish famines flipped. While we have been able to connect specific epigenetic changes to health effects in mice, we're a long way off from being able to make those connections in humans. That may sound like a bummer, but it's mostly because we humans don't live in the well-controlled environment of a laboratory. And for that, we should be grateful.
Very good. Thank you so much for staying with me here on this one. Hold on. I just need, okay, I hope this turned itself out. Okay, off, I mean. So as you can see, there's some pluses and some minuses about epigenetics. And just to say, before I go through reading the slide with you, because this is kind of a lot of text, just to say that, you know, the pluses is that we can pass on, you know, hardiness, you know, just as it was talking about in the Swedish study. What can also happen is that we do pass down fear or how we perceive certain environments. And that means that, so in other words, what happens is that certain genes can get turned on or off as a result of how we experience the experiences we have. And so there's been a lot of study done specifically with Holocaust survivors and how their children exhibited the same symptoms that the parents had as a result, simulating PTSD, even though the children never experienced PTSD. And of course, you can imagine this is a very complex undertaking, so it's very hard to exactly pinpoint, as they said. But I think if we are taking epigenetics into consideration in the context of talking about well-being, then this message that we can turn certain genes on or off that help us to become more resistant or healthy or heal, then that should really, you know, be an inspiration for us in a way to try to to focus on our well-being, because even though we don't know the exact mechanisms of how that gets passed on, there is a potential that we can do that. And, you know, who doesn't want to have their children and children's children, you know, become, you know, develop these qualities that we want to look at. So I do want to read to you briefly the Harvard Center for the Study of, someone help me out in the chat. I'm totally standing on that line. It's the Harvard Center for Childhood Study. It's not that. It sounds very similar. So please, someone put the correct name in the chat. I know someone here knows this. So basically, they talk about the genes in children inherit from their parents, from their biological parents, provide information that guides their development. So, for example, how tall they could eventually become, or the kind of temperament they could have, right? And so when experiences during development rearrange the epigenetic markers, so basically turn them on or off, that govern gene expression, they can change whether and how genes release the information they carry. Thank you, Harvard Center for the Developing Child. Yes, thank you, Caitlin. I appreciate it. Teamwork. Okay, and so thus the epigenome can be affected by positive experiences, as we said, as supportive relationships and opportunities for learning, or negative influences such as environmental toxins or stressful life circumstances. And these basically leave that signature, the epigenetic signature that we then, you know, pass down. So we do want to, of course, practice things that we think will grow that. Okay, so I'm going to move on and lead us into talking about the ACEs. So many of you know, are familiar with adverse childhood experiences, and I'm kind of going to zoom through these. If you'd like more information, please go back to our previous recordings where we talked about this as well. But it just, you know, in the N.E.A.R science, there's an A, and so that stands for the ACEs. And so where does this come from? Oh, I must have pressed the wrong button. I apologize. So we just get a quick middle preview of what we went through. So talking about ACEs. Right, so what we learned from adverse childhood experiences is that there is a long-term effect on our health and well-being when we experience prolonged periods of toxic stress. And the more stress we experience, in other words, from more different factors, so to speak, different kinds of experiences, the greater the risk for also adverse health outcomes. We know the risk for behaviors that are, you know, like addiction or, you know, developing lung disease and smoking, whether or not from smoking increases. We know that the level of the risk for drug misuse increases, the risk for suicide increases, the risk for early onset of sexual intercourse increases, and we become more likely to be depressed and have other, you know, functions. And so there's more, of course, and ultimately the more ACEs we have, the higher the chances that we have a shorter life expectancy. And so what we also know is that ACEs, so the individual experiences that we have, mostly in our homes and the relationships that we have with those who care for us as we grow up, are not the only factors that contribute to basically a toxic stress response in the body. So what we learned is that the original ACE study doesn't tell the whole story. We really need to expand the ACEs and look at more. I didn't put a link in here, but the Philadelphia ACEs study did an expanded version of this, of understanding ACEs, and also came up with really important information that can help us. And Caitlin, thank you so much for putting in the YouTube channel where a lot of this is recorded. Um, so what we need to consider is we need to think about our community safety and trust. How safe do we feel when we leave our homes? How safe do we feel when we go to big gatherings? And we all know about so many of the tragedies that continue to happen. You can't even say, we have all of these. So this impacts all of our sense of safety and how we're feeling in the world. And, if you are a person who has experienced racism or discrimination, that alone is a huge factor on, how you experience stress or your stress levels that you have experienced. And you combine that with your sense of feeling safe in the community, those are all factors that contribute to our increased stress levels and the risk for experiencing toxic stress. And so is the experience of being bullied or experiencing food insecurity and witnessing violence. And so, when we talk about ACEs, we often talk about ACEs being one of the greatest unaddressed public health issues. And so now take the expanded ACEs, and that alone tells us that, so much of the work that I know many of you are doing here and we're doing really can only do so much unless we really address this whole picture of how we care for our communities and how we support each other to be able to experience a sense of safety, to experience connection, and to have this ability to self-regulate, which is what we, talk about really contributes to being able to be resilient. And we'll get there in a moment. So, the social location of trauma is not just within the family and the bodies, but it's also really in this, generational embodiment of our historical trauma, right? So the reason why I told you a little bit more about my own story is because, running away from our history is not possible. We have to face it. We have to look at it and recognize the impact it has on different people in different communities. And then, we can understand where potentially, if we think about epigenetics, certain sense of anxiety, for example, might come from. And so how do we address that? How do we heal that? It's a complex picture. ACEs have long-term impact on all of these areas that you see listed here. So I'm not going through this because I think this picture speaks for itself. And that's, why we want to look at that. There are really different areas, so to speak, of reaction when we experience toxic stress, right? So we have a spiritual life, we have our cognitive, how we learn, how we're able to understand, make sense of the world, our behavior, our physical health, social health, emotional health, and all of those aspects are impacted because we don't just come with, our child hat or the mom hat or the teacher hat. We always show up as a whole person, even if we, don't pay attention to those hats, or we don't play all the roles at the same time. Our bodies are always in everything with everything. And so that's what we have to consider. So let's talk about resilience. As I mentioned before, resilience is not the ability to shake it off, right? It's not the ability to, I can go do this on my own. I got this. I understand things. It's not, it's not just that ability, because our bodies will remember, right? If you don't work on what you have, the experiences, what we have accumulated in, basically this allostatic realm, our nervous system remembers, and it will eventually show up with some kind of markers. If you're not listening to this, I have to make it a little louder and come up with something else. And so this is why we want to listen to this. So we can think about resilience in 3 waves. And I'm going to make this hopefully quite simple. So the first wave was really talking about more in this environmental, physical realm. We talked about it specifically in that disaster relief. where we talk about the ability to bounce back and recoil, right? So it's coming back to a state. But what took place then is that we recognized, whoa, when there's a disaster or something that occurred, oftentimes we cannot come back to a state because things have changed, which is why we need to be resilient. We're facing continuous change. So how does that impact our psychology and the whole human being? And so this is when we looked at, okay, so how well are you able to adapt to change and misfortune? How quickly can you grow from it? We have something called post-traumatic growth, which is a wonderful field to delve into as well. We will address it in one of the upcoming sessions. But really looking at resilience from that perspective. And this third way of thinking, I apologize, this is kind of very theoretical, but I'll explain it or try to translate it a little bit more. So it's really, this third way of thinking recognizes that there is a bigger, that there's an intersection basically of these different experiences and realms, and that all of these impact how we experience things. So what they say here, Atala et al., they say, basically resilience represents outcomes and processes that emerged in relation to intersecting difficulties that people have basically as a result of their experiences with human suffering. So in other words, what this means is that we all have different responses to human suffering. And so the outcomes of basically what happens when we have suffered, what is the process, how we get there and how we move on, and how is that basically coming out, this outcome and the process, in relationship to these intersecting difficulties that we talked about. It may be adversities in the home or in the community or, in the world. So how are we responding to that? So considering that is important when we talk about resilience. And so, if we are connecting this back to this parasympathetic and the sympathetic response systems that you saw earlier in the picture, and I do believe I have another one here. Wait. Nope, I don't. Okay. Is basically that you experience this normal, ebb and flow of our feelings and emotions that continue to drive us through the day. So I want to tell you that these emotions, they are your North Stars, and we ignore them all the time. We don't pay attention to what's going on with us, right? We might feel the tip of the iceberg, that we feel restless, anxious, or something, but we're not actually getting to really understand this emotional. We're not paying attention to it. When we really listen and really name the feelings that we have, not only can we tame things when we name things, but we also are able to really tune in to our own navigation system, the North Stars that tell us, wait, go this way, you're off over here, you're off over there, and so it's never being in a perfect zone. And we want, we have these flows throughout all the time, but it's really about staying within that zone where you can be regulated and when you are able to read your own thoughts. So where your allostatic load gets basically built off on an ongoing basis. So you're not accumulating all the time. So what happens when you are experiencing these triggers or stress, right? You may get out of the zone. And so then you get to these intense feelings. They too can be your North Star, but they tell you they're also your emergency lights, that say, if you're feeling edgy, honey, you're out of your zone. If you're feeling irritable or anxiety, panic, mania, sweetheart, take a deep breath. It's doing something. On the other hand, too, with, depression, sadness, isolation, those are all intense emotions that we shouldn't feel ashamed of course, but these are, they're communicating to us that we need to activate, or we can activate either, excel or slow down on our parasympathetic or the sympathetic responses. And that is where we're able to regulate. So this is what that zone looks like. And so that's where we want to live. And we can broaden this zone, right? So doing this, naming the emotions that you have, naming the feelings that we have, paying attention to the sensations that we are experiencing in the body. The other day I was trying to really delve into a strong emotion that came up for me, and I couldn't quite name it. But so I started with the sensation, right? Whoa, I have this like burning on my chest, and it feels like my throat is closing, and boy, I feel tears coming on, and so you just name it out loud for yourself, and you eventually come to a point where you can understand what's going on, and the intensity reduces, and you can then, respond to what your navigation system is telling you need. So I'm simplifying this here very much. I am fully aware that it's not that, that it's very a complex situation. But if we're talking about well-being and really creating a framework, then developing emotional vocabulary is a huge step into that point. And yes, you will get actually I can definitely add the slides as well as the recording for today. So we talked a long time now about the impact of prolonged stress, of experiencing prolonged stress, right? So this is what we've discussed for long. And what I really want us to talk about is the impact of prolonged experience of love. Because if we talk about, what stress can do to our body as a physical, biological reaction in us, then what do you think love, which is also a feeling, as an emotion that elicits specific chemical reactions in our bodies, what do you think experiencing love for a prolonged period of time can do for us? So what I would love to hear from you is, so what would that look like for you? How would you, if you experience that, I see that, it elevates you, self-esteem. Yes, keep it going, peace. I want to hear safety, joy. Yes, fills you up with joy, safety. Security, yes. Healing. Can you imagine if the stress can devastate our system, how love could heal our system? In getting back to a state where, we can activate the cells to heal themselves. Yes, that's resilience, confidence, grounding. Yes, feeling supported. I love it. Yeah, thank you. I mean, keep that going. You feel safe. Exactly. So that's, and the sense of feeling safe, it means that your upstairs brain can actually be online for a long period of time. And think about how you're going to be able to solve problems when you stay in that space, as opposed to being triggered all the time and constantly having to look, somebody coming down there, somebody coming, do I have to watch out? No, you can just stay here, relax, feel safe, and your, higher part of the brain will get to town with, addressing some of the problems that you might experience and come up with all new solutions or new ideas, may imagine what else is possible, something you might not have thought about. And so the ripple effect from that on our lives, on our communities, on our relationships with one another is huge. And that's really what we can explore in this concept or in this conversation where we talk about, well-being. So how would you translate that, right? So what you've learned here, what feeling, and you've already mentioned quite a few here, but what is a feeling that you think would be part of the foundation for well-being? And it should say well-being and not wellness, Julika. See, I'm so programmed myself. I'm still in the process of reprogramming. So I see another safe. I'd love to hear some feelings from you all in the chat. Happiness, elated, happy, yes. Yeah, feeling content. Yes, there it is. Warmth, heard, yes. Peaceful, loved, amused. Yep, humor is so important as well. Yes, I have a friend who says, oh, I have to keep myself funny. So, you know, sometimes it's good to watch comedy or something. Yes, accept it. Those are all foundations for well-being. So this is why, you know, these questions really become, how do we create environments and spaces where all of that is possible? So that's you know, what hopefully this provides us with some framework. So we talked about, you know, this new framework, hopefully, or maybe not so new, but how we puzzle it together in a different picture can help us to support well-being. I'm just going to leave this up to let you know, but I do want to take the stop my share actually, because I'd love for us to be able to put our videos on if you're so brave, and we can just, you know, see each other and have a little bit of connection here to say, you know, hello, and to debrief if any one of you would love to you know, reflect on what you heard. I know this was a lot of me talking. I love that you participated in the chat. Really, thank you so much. But yeah, and it's good to see some of you here. So time to unmute. You can make noise.
I've been on YouTube looking for all these videos that you've sent us because I want to share them far and wide. They're so wonderful, especially on epigenetics, taking the research about the rats and the olfactory experiment, and then the Swedish famine experiment, and presenting them in a way not only opens us up to view mental health and our own health differently, but the way in which we view others who are different from us. And so, like, knowing people in my community who have a really hard time, like, we're trying to bring people together in order to enhance our understanding of others whose actions we might not understand, or whose you know, reactions and responses to current events, you know, we might be offended by. You know, there are feelings like that in this culture that we're in right now, and showing this to people who struggle with understanding why people get so upset about this or that, it's such an eye-opener, and I feel like it's a peacemaker. So I just want to thank you so much, Julika, for sharing that, and so many of these you know, kind of broken down explanations of, you know, that inherited trauma and epigenetic research. Thank you.
Oh, good. Yeah, thank you. So yes, I will share the links, you know, to the recording of this, and I just put a link for a survey in the chat that I would love for you to fill out if you can. And yes, you can still make noise or ask questions or comments. Now is your time to engage. All right, yes, I see some people waving. So thank you everybody so much. Maybe we can close out this chat if you just put one word that you're feeling right now. Describe a feeling, name a feeling you have, and put it in the chat. And yeah, maybe we'll do that all here. Perfect. Relaxed, grateful. Thank you, motivated. Wonderful. Encouraged. Excellent. Oh, yay. Okay, wonderful. I'm going to post that link to the survey one more time so it doesn't get lost in the pieces. Yeah, and then I really hope that you will join us for the remainder of the series. Thank you so much for coming. I appreciate it. And I'm going to hang out here just for a minute in case anyone wants to say something. But, you know, this is the teacher's desk or something. Yeah, thank you so much.